they suggest that there's several problems really in realist thinking. Firstly, well, when we analyze data, we interpret data. And interpretation doesn't allow for those kind of standards that the realists are demanding. And it doesn't for realists either. So this is, in a sense, while you're interpreting things, so therefore it cannot be scientific in the way in which you're portraying that they are. Secondly, beliefs, intentions, and perceptions. In international politics, in international security, we know that there's a couple of concepts that are, in a sense, coming into our analysis, whether that is our own beliefs, whether that is our own intentions, or the perceptions that really it's difficult to keep them out of the analysis, but even more importantly, it's very difficult to see objectively, scientifically, what are the beliefs of individuals? What are the intentions of individuals? You can make, in a sense, deductions about their intentions. Yeah? You can look at their behavior and then assume certain intentions from that behavior, but you don't know, you can't see it, because intentions ultimately are in people's heads. Same thing about perceptions. Perceptions can be true, can be accurate, but perceptions are ultimately not something that you entirely observe, but you put together your own life experience and then you compare and contrast it with what you're seeing. So ultimately, you are part of that perception. And then finally, it's also identities. Identities are something that people feel, that they feel emotionally attached to. It's not something that you can see as such. It is something intangible. So all of that makes, in a sense, realist thinking much, much more complicated, because despite the claim that they're adhering to these very highly scientific standards, ultimately those issues are there, whether you are dealing with constructivist scholars, whether you're dealing with realist scholars, liberal scholars, neo-realist scholars, they all have the same potential problems. So therefore, those proponents to new approaches to security, they suggest, well, there's no objective world. Objective world in a sense that is distinct from our own collective construction and the construction of various actors. So there's no objective knowledge of world politics as a consequence. Points, and of course you can triangulate those viewpoints, you can point out facts, but the objective world is, in the end, a collective construction by the various actors. So therefore, you need to use interpretive methods of research, because you are not able to just have your continuous laws in the same way as you might have that, let's say, in mathematics or physics or other natural sciences. There's a contextual understanding of the world that is necessary. You need to understand the context in which you're operating. You need to understand the way in which that context shapes politics, in which it shapes international security, in which it shapes your understanding of the theories and your application of the theories. So in response to that, we had the development of the so-called critical security studies. Critical security studies started with a 1994 conference about the future direction of security studies. The label, in fact, critical security studies, is really there for different interpretation. Not all scholars are necessarily in agreement what this critical means. There's different interpretation of what critical could mean, but in general, people have it as a catch-all phrase for anybody who's not fully in agreement with neo-realist or even classical realist thinking. Critical here could be interpreted in the Coxian sense of the term, Marxist sense of the term, in terms of problem-solving theories versus critical theories that have an emancipatory purpose and orientation towards security. If we look at the Frankfurt School or Gramsci, we would see critical theory here with its key concept and key aim, which is ultimately human emancipation. So any kind of critical theory has a human betterment as an idea behind it. This obviously doesn't work with realist thinking that ultimately say humans are the way humans are, and have a relatively pessimistic outlook. Here, there's more of a maybe idealist, maybe optimistic outlook that humans can emancipate. Also, in this basket of constructivism, the so-called ideational turn in security studies and also international relations. Here, the key concepts of constructivism is the impact of norms on politics and on security. Norms here, if we take the definition, as intersubjective beliefs about the social and natural world that define actors, the situation, and the possibility of action. So they're very, very important in terms of the belief structure. They define actors. They, in a sense, constitute and reconstitute actors, actions, and identities. Bartelsson, in 1995, he wrote about security not primarily as an object of foreign policy, but he suggests security before security can be brought to become an object of foreign policy. It requires a prior differentiation of what is alien, what is the other, what is simply outside of the state and therefore can threaten it. Ultimately, without having the other, without having the outside, you can't have security or an interpretation of security within foreign policy. Difference here compared to realism or, for instance, liberalism is that we have a mutual constitution of actors and social structure. Actors are constituted mutually in their interaction. So who is what and what is that person and what are they doing and what is their worth and why are they doing it and so on is all done in relation to one another. And that then creates a social structure in which those actors then fit in. Norms constitute those actors. Without those norms, those actors wouldn't be behaving in the way in which they are behaving. It either constrains the actors or enables the actors. Certain norms will allow actors to do certain things that maybe in other times they're not able to do, but they're also constraining them, preventing them from doing things that perhaps in other times they can't do. There's a clear relationship here between identity and interests. So identity, who are we? What's the identity of the state? What's the identity of certain actors? What are our interests? How are our interests constructed? Who defined our interests and how do we see our interests? Now, Ted Hopf here also suggests in telling you who you are, identity strongly imply a particular set of interests or preferences with respect to choices of action in particular domains and with respect to particular actors. So identities for Ted Hopf are very, very important because identities really, in a sense, suggests a particular set of interests or preferences. So with a particular identity, you have certain interests, you have certain preferences. And with those, you choose your action in a particular area. And this happens with all actors. All actors, in a sense, act in this particular way. In security studies, those scholars that look at it from a constructivist point of view, they really look at the examination of norms. They look at how they shape individual state identities. So for instance, if we look at Germany, for instance, how has the Second World War, the kind of, in a sense, occupation of Germany, the Holocaust, how have they all shaped the state identity? We could say the same thing about Japan. How has, for instance, the loss in the Second World War shaped a particular state identity? You could make that argument about all states, really. How history, how norms, how all of those have shaped particular state identities, and how are they reproducing themselves? How is this new identity reproduced in new state actions? So, for instance, when we see foreign policy of certain states, we will see a reference to the identity of the state, how the state perceives itself, the kind of norms that leads to that identity. We see a reference in all foreign policy interaction. We see that also here when it comes, for instance, to human rights or the diffusion of